Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the Bennington Firehouse. It's the Bennington Select Board. Today is November 24th. It is 6 p.m. And join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks. We're going to start by wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Safe travels for anybody going out there, and welcome home to anybody's coming to visit. A lot of people move around, so be conscious of washing hands and being where you are and trying not to keep the diseases from spreading around. There's the lights. I'll introduce the board. Tom Jacobs to the left, and Michael Keene,
Hiya.
Vice Chair, Sharon Brush. I'm Greg Van Houten, Chair, Justin Corcoran, John McFadden. Jim Carroll is absent tonight, he's ill. We have our town manager, Stu Hurd, and Linda Bermuda is recording. Thank you, Linda. We're going to start with the minutes from our last meeting, November 10th. Do I have a motion to
Move to approve.
Second?
I'll second it.
So second, any discussion? Those in favor? Is that four? We have 4 in favor, 2 abstaining,
Yep.
and 1 absent. So that is passed. The next item is the warrants. Is anybody with any questions on the warrants? Tom, can you start?
Just a question. I noticed we paid for our annual audit to Love Cody and Company. Do we have a bidding process for accounting and legal services?
We have in the past. We haven't exercised that opportunity over the last several years. We've been working, as you know, with Whitten Wilmington et al.
Right.
For legal services, and Love and Cody have been handling the auditing responsibilities, I think probably for the last decade.
Again, I have no reason to expect that the value billing is online. It's just that I don't have anything to compare it by. And maybe when we come to talk about the budget in general context, we could have some more discussion about that. That's all I have.
Michael?
I had a question that Stu answered. He might want to bring it up again. The charge from Great Fields Kennels for the Derek Jensen pit bulls, it's about $2,500.
Yes, and obviously we have impounded those animals. We're responsible for the bill. We will seek reimbursement from Mr. Jensen when he is prosecuted, and we've also been in contact with a number of organizations, not necessarily local, who are animal rescuers, and as well as I think the New England Humane Society, and they may be willing to help us through grants to offset some of that cost.
Thank you. That's it.
Sharon?
No, I have nothing this evening.
Justin?
I don't, Greg.
John?
I'm all set.
I'm all as well, so that is the warrants for tonight. Citizens, any citizens like to approach the board? Mike? Yeah, right there's fine.
I just presented you with a referendum. I would like the board to consider putting on the ballot in March, charter amendment, so that the citizens can vote on important issues that face us. We just went through the Shire's housing thing, and there was 1,000 signatures, and it was kind of for naught, and this referendum would make it so that people could vote on the issues that the select board takes. They still need to get 5%, about 500 votes in a 30-day period to do it, but I think it would bring more feeling that the community has some say in their local government. Brattleboro has this in their charter. Other towns do, and I think it would make the citizens of Bennington feel almost more responsible if you voted the other way on the charter tonight. The other side could then come and say, well, we'd like to vote for the town to do this. This wouldn't impede the select board's rights of anything. You still have your same jurisdiction powers and everything else. And it wouldn't affect emergency things or safety things or health things. This is just on the big issues like you just handled. And I'd like you folks to consider it. If you do choose to do it, we have to bring it to you early because you have to warn amendment, and Stu can tell you more on this, on a charter. You have to warn it an extra week or two or something like that, rather than just in the middle of January.
Than the normal, right? Okay.
Would you want to,
Yeah, I could read this for you, sure. The title is "To Provide Voters the Opportunity to Vote on Issues Important to Them." The Bennington Charter could be amended to add Section 103-105 as follows. A, voters equal to 5% of the checklist may petition a select board within 30 days of any vote of the board to require a public vote to disapprove the decision of the board. Upon receipt of the petition, the board shall warn a vote by Australian ballot within 60 days of the date of the receipt of the petition. B, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the select board may refer any decision it would otherwise make to vote of the town upon proper notice and warning, and the decision of a majority of the voters shall constitute binding action on the part of the town. C, this section shall not apply to emergencies where the public health, safety, and welfare is at risk. Such decisions shall be binding upon the vote of the select board. Note, this proposal is intended to restore the original delegated power of the electorate given to the select board by the voters on issues which engender strong public reaction. This is the method available to voters in the adoption of ordinances and the sale of public property in general municipal law. 24 Vermont SA, or VSAs, chapters 106 and 1061 and 1972. Referendum is also available to Brattleboro voters by chapter 107-3.4 of the town charter for all actions taken by the town's representative town meeting. Okay.
I also wouldn't put all of what you people went through as a select board, whether you people here in the future or not, it wouldn't put the select board through all of the public anger, angst. They would feel like, well, you've done your job, now we have our opportunity to weigh in on it. And that's why I think it would be a good thing to do. It's nothing to do with me. Like I said, either side of that issue, the current issue, could have used this if they disagreed.
Sure.
And it's not easy to get 500 signatures in 30 days.
No, it's not.
If it's not a huge, big issue, so.
Isn't this option available currently on some issues already?
With ordinances, that's the way it works. If we pass an ordinance, there's the 30-day window.
So it would expand
to
upon that?
Things like accepting grants, development decisions, things like that. And I think, that's what the discussion would be as to where, anytime there's something like this, it's the unintended consequences you're trying to predict and figure out if they're going to work. I understand the sentiment of it. Board have any questions on that? Or,
Yeah.
We obviously don't take action on things like this. Tonight, we want to research it, and I'd want to look at some of the legal things.
Timeline, that's all.
Yes.
Get it on in March.
We'll find out what that date is. And,
Yeah, I think it's certainly worthy of entertaining, but I also think that there are, definitions of important issues, how these things actually play out, because if you're just going to have a select board who can be second-guessed in just about on every occasion, then I wonder about the value of having this type of a model for our town. But I think it's certainly worthy of pursuit, and if we should have a discussion in a full agenda.
And you could also look into, if you have the time, as to why Brattleboro has it.
Right.
well, when you have one out there, it's always someplace that you can research it, which is
I
good.
don't think people are going to question you make by going out running out and 500 signatures. Believe me, it's not easy getting, 500.
Right.
But anyway,
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
If we look to put this on, you would need us to approve it to put it on the ballot for March, is that the fact?
Correct.
I could go out and do it by petition, but,
Right.
You could do it by petition anyhow.
I'm not going to. This is something that I think would help you guys.
Stuart, do you know what the timeline on something like that would be, where we'd have to?
I don't. Off the top of my head, I think the first hearing on a charter change would have to be something in the realm of 45 to 60 days before town meeting. So you're looking at nearly 2 months
So
lead time.
there's public hearings that have to take
Yes, there are
place?
2 public hearings that are required on a charter change. The second public hearing can be the floor meeting the night before the vote. But you must warn those hearings. The change that you propose must be placed in the legal notices, and I'll get you the information as to what the time frame is.
Can we look at putting it on the agenda for our next meeting and hopefully
Yep.
within that amount of time, we have the time to research ourselves and, communicate with the other.
I don't want to rush this. I'd like to get some research, and I don't think the next meeting we're going to have enough information. I think our general counsel,
I guess I wasn't pushing to have a decision made by
Right.
next meeting, but just to have an open discussion of what we've
I don't think
collected.
we're going to have enough information to have an open discussion.
Maybe
And
the
I-
second meeting in December would
Yeah.
work then.
You just have to watch
Yeah.
before you drive.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And if the discussion leads to another month, then all of a sudden we're kind of
Yeah,
losing.
Ben.
I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I don't think it's going to take a lot of discussion. You're not going to need more than from now until the next meeting to find out information.
Right.
You can stall this thing until it can't be done this year, if that's what you're trying to do.
If you're saying that, then you're very mistaken. The fact of the matter is, this is an important amendment if it gets to the voters, and we want to do some work to make sure that the voters get informed. And before the voters can be informed, the select board has to get informed, and that's what I'm looking to. Well,
that
have an idea that there is a holiday coming up, there's some traveling coming on, so frankly, I'm not ready to discuss it the next meeting.
Stuart, can we get the information from Rob by the second meeting in December? Whatever.
I can have the timing sequence to you at the next meeting. That's not the issue. The issue is, and I tend to agree with Tom, the issue is, what's an important issue is not defined here.
Right.
So we don't,
Who are we looking to have define that, I guess, would be my question. Who would we look to have define what's an important issue?
that would
I
be
think it
your
would be the board.
responsibility. if
So
you're
that
gonna
would be,
put it out.
so we'd have to get it on an agenda to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that,
It's not as big as you think it is. It's not going to take away your power. It's not going to do anything like that.
yeah, and those are,
There's an option. Not only that, you guys in March, I mean, two of you are up. I don't know which two
James and I are both up,
you and
yeah.
James are up. So, I mean, you're asking the voters then for something, trust.
Yeah.
And you're just saying to them, hey, we trust the voters if you think it's an important issue, You go off and get your 500 signatures. And you wouldn't have, I don't think you'd have the anger in the town, and still in the town of Briscoe or the Shire thing with your board or against it. Because if you guys voted the other way, the other party could have come back and said, well, we want to challenge that, because we want this project to go forward. But I didn't see anything on my time here, other than make it a Walmart issue, that ever got this much attention. And I don't think it's necessary to count because I think the people wouldn't have the anger if they thought they had the right to say, well, we disagree with that, we're going to vote and do this. And then the voter again chooses.
Yeah. I'm just, not to carry on the discussion tonight, but frankly, I'm not so sure that the voters don't already have that as to whether or not we need to amend the charter for a specific purpose. Well,
They have it in
again,
the form of electing the new selectmen
Yeah, but you have
in
to
March.
wait- You have to wait a whole year.
Right. And you could have things slip through.
They have this on property issues, like I think Justin and you said, they have this now on selling the property and everything else, they can do it. But this is just extending that to the voters. I don't see what the harm is. You guys deliberate.
Yeah.
Can
we'll take a look
we
at it.
make it an agenda issue for the 22nd? That gives us a
Well,
month
let's see where we're at. I can, we can find out
That
how much
gives us a-
information we got by then. If
Right.
everybody feels comfortable to
Gives
discuss it,
us a month,
yeah,
to get it together.
we can
That should be
shoot, we
more
can
than enough
target
time.
that, and,
More than enough time, I think, to get it together in a
Yeah.
month, so. And that would give us time if we decided to do it, to put it on the ballot in March also.
right. That's fine. Thank you, Mike.
thank you.
Thanks.
Any other citizens? Joanne, please identify yourself and come to the mic. Yeah, that's fine. That one there, yeah.
Hi, Joanne Ehrenhaus. I'm the director of the Bennington Area Chamber of Commerce. And real quickly, on a very non-contentious note, I want to remind everybody that next week, December 3rd, we have the tree lighting at the Veterans Home out by the gazebo, and that will be at 5:30 in the evening. And tomorrow morning at 8:15, the Vermont State Capitol lawn tree is being cut on Don Keelan's property and will be then wrapped and taken up to Montpelier. And that lighting ceremony is December 4th at dusk. So hopefully some of us will get up there to see it lit. Anyway, I just wanted to remind everybody of those two important dates. Thank you.
And I believe Saturday is Small Business Saturday.
Oh, my God,
correct?
don't get me started. We sent out a list 2 feet long on the Chamber Friday e-blast. But a word to the wise, we're finding out only 20% of our members are opening their e-blasts. So if anybody out there in TV land really wants to know what's going on, and you're a member of the Chamber, open your Friday e-blast from Marie.
And
Okay,
get comfortable, because there's
Yeah.
a lot to read.
There's so much to do. There's so many great things happening.
Thank you, Joe.
And Joanne, will there be a visitor at the vet's home that night?
Well, if you're a good girl, maybe.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. We just want to touch on, we got a few letters, again, from folks who were late with their property tax and experienced the 8% penalty. And we've seen this before, where people are asking us to waive the penalty or just basically protesting the penalty. It's come up past boards in my history where the board has discussed it and said basically that's the policy, other people have paid it, we can't waive that, for one person, not another. Does the board have any desire to explore that subject? I mean, my personal feeling is I think an 8% on the first day is kind of stiff to hit our customers with. If somebody's hurting and having trouble paying their taxes, it really puts a lot more pressure on them. There's a movement statewide to reduce that or eliminate it. The people behind that claim that the towns that have reduced it to 3% or not have not seen an increase in delinquency. That they're finding that people pay their taxes when they can pay their taxes, and when they can't pay their taxes, they're in trouble. And my perspective is they're our customers. I think we're hitting them a little hard with that, but
I think it's a hard hit on day one, too. I don't think it's something we can look at on a case-by-case basis, just simply because, you start trying to decide who's at fault and who's not.
Yeah,
But I think
you can't
as
do
a
it that
general
way.
policy, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to at least, maybe looking to stagger that out a little bit. On day one, if somebody truly made a mistake.
I'd be interested in looking at just setting a grace period, 5 days, 10 days. What we're looking to is just get our tax money in. So if that's going to happen
Right.
within the first 5 or 10 days.
there is a cost associated with late taxes coming in, and that's what was designed at. I tend to
Right, we have
think
to pay the
8%
school
is-
taxes while
Right.
we receive them.
Yeah. And staff has to, make trips back and forth. and
Maybe
that's
we
it.
could look at staggering that number, starting with a lower number and working up to that 8%.
Again, we're coming to, ballot time, so if we were going to do something like that, it needs to be approved by the voters.
And that needs to go to the voters?
Yeah, correct, Stuart?
I believe
A
it
change
does,
in that, I
yes.
believe, last time we discussed that was, what I remember is that a change to that would have to go on the ballot and be approved by the voters.
Do
So
we have those costs listed out somewhere so we can look at it at a higher level? The costs associated with the late payment, whether it be 1 day, 5 days, whatever?
Well, I would have to say the cost is minimal. The penalty or the commission was originally established because the delinquent tax collector was generally an elected office. However, the statutes also provide that by a vote of the people, a staff person for the town can be elected, as I was more than a decade ago, to be the delinquent collector, and therefore the penalty simply goes into the general fund. And so it's there to discourage delinquencies. If it's too much of a discouragement, that's up to you folks to decide whether or not you want to change it and put it before the voters and let the voters be heard. There are a number of towns that have gone, as Greg has said, they've eliminated the penalty, they've gone to a graduated penalty, they've reduced the penalty from 8%. The statute says we may charge the penalty. So it's really...
It's 8% day one, right, and then 1% each month.
Well, the
As it accrues,
1% is
correct?
the interest on the monies.
Right.
And if you charge the interest, then if someone is successful in an appeal after paying the taxes, you pay out the money based on the same 1% interest. That's by statute as well. But the commission or the penalty or the fee associated with the late payment is a separate thing altogether, and that a town has the opportunity to reduce that should they decide to do so.
Nobody's ever going to be happy no matter what penalty they get assessed on something like this. I mean, there's no, obviously.
Right.
But I think the question is 8% on day one
Yeah, I mean,
High-
one of the
a
letters
bit high.
said that they felt that 3% was fair, but that 8% was extreme, which is kind of the way I felt about it, is, you know, you're late, you kind of expect to it, you're out of town, you miss it, but.
Yeah, I mean, they get their tax bill in August, and they
Yeah.
should be,
Right, and I don't think
Prepared to pay it.
most people will agree with
Right,
that.
and you
They
have to-
plenty of time, it's just a slip.
It
or
does
they-
need to be a way to discourage people from, you know, for whatever reason, making a decision that they're better off to pay it late as
Yeah.
opposed to paying it on time.
And from a business standpoint, you know, financially, it makes more sense to pay it on time if you have the money. If you don't have the money and you're struggling at a tough year, I don't want the town to be the nail in the coffin.
Right, I think
You know.
if we could look at some graduated system.
Is this a big
No.
number that we're talking about?
It's close to $1 million a year in penalties, isn't it?
Not in
Last time?
penalties, no.
Or in
Just
penalties and
The
interest?
delinquency generally runs about $1 million a year. So ultimately, as you collect that over time,
So it's tax and penalties is $1 million?
it's, yeah,
Okay.
taxes is the,
Okay.
is what the $1 million is. The penalty would
Gotcha.
be 8% of that total.
I find it pretty stiff and objectionable
Yeah.
at that level.
Yeah.
Businesses don't do that.
Should we, we can ask Stuart to, you know, have something written up legally, you know, that would be legally binding in another, like with a 3%? I mean, with the
Could we
same
leave
procedure and a 3%?
Could we leave the number open,
No.
but go for
Right.
the form, and then talk more about the percentage?
Yeah.
Because I think I join with the rest of you that it's rather onerous, and it doesn't really, other than make folks very upset and charging to the town office at the last minute. I just would like to see it, again, planned out rather than just to come up with a number, looking at other towns.
Okay, we can do that.
yeah, maybe if you could have Melissa, like, take just this year's delinquency or this year's people that have been late, and just what the difference, the dollar amount and what the difference would be, and if we charge 3% as opposed to 8%, so we can.
Yeah, we can
put a-
do that.
Put a number to it.
Sure.
All right, I'll see what I can find on what other towns are out there as well that have
Thank
done it.
you.
I did that once, so it's not that difficult. All righty, any other citizens? Very good, we will move on. The Bennington Free Library. Can you step up to the library, to the microphone?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to appear. On behalf of the library's Board of Trustees and Directors, we are asking the Select Board to warn an article in the 215 town meeting for funding. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Lynn Fontana McCann, the Director of the Bennington Free Library. We're looking for support from the town for an amount not to exceed $300,000, and this is to replace the library's roof. I sent you a packet, so you've received all the information about that, and I handed out a little bit of material today, too. I want you to know that we have been trying to secure funding through grants and private donations for the library's roof unsuccessfully. It's a very, very large project, and it just exceeds our ability to raise funds. We've tried breaking it up into smaller projects. We've tried going for gold and trying to get funding for the entire project without any success. So we're hoping that the town will support us in this, and that the Select Board will agree to put this in the warning for the 215 town meeting. Any questions?
John, you have any questions for Lynn?
Just looking at the quotes, this is for a replacement of the slate roof, right?
This would replace the entire roof.
Did you look at other options instead of a slate roof? as
Well, it's in a historic district, and we really, because it's not technically a historic building, we'd like to replace it with slate. We could look at other options, but when we successfully received a grant from the Historic Preservation Commission, but that was for a very small amount.
Right.
Their requirement is that, of course, you replace it with the material that was used originally. With the timing of this grant, we're hoping that we could actually get some support through the USDA, which would reduce that $300,000 amount for the town. But we have no way of knowing what level of funding they would give us. I think generally their grants run in about the $20,000 range,
How
although
much
you
is
could.
the historic preservation grant?
It was for $20,000, but we had to refuse it because we didn't receive the other funding that we were trying to get. So I think the plan for the library would be, if the town agreed to this and if the voters approved it, that we would apply for USD grants as well, in the amount of whatever they would give us, up to $50,000. That would reduce the amount that we would need from the town to reduce the cost of the project.
I think I'm, kind of go a little bit leaning toward where John is. I'd want to see some other, I think, cost options for other materials. $300,000 is a lot of money to add on to our budget.
I don't think historic preservation will let them do that, though.
Historic preservation doesn't have the authority to tell them no.
Well, to clarify, we would not be looking for historic preservation funds, and the reason we wouldn't.
They can make recommendations. They have no authority to tell them.
It
yes
could
or
be
no.
tied to a grant, in which case,
Does
if
this
it's
go
not,
to
that's their
DRB or anything,
recommendation.
or
Pardon?
it does go to the DRB?
Yeah, but I'd spoken to him about that, and he didn't think that it would be a big issue, although the preference would be that it be replaced with slate. And let's face it, I mean, the library is an institution. It's an anchor institution downtown, and we should do everything that we can. I mean, the library certainly has been whittling away at projects. If you look at the handout that that I gave you today, I mean, we've raised grant and private funding for over $500,000 to maintain the building in the condition and in its state that, as well as we can. And our preference really would be to go with a slate roof. What are you suggesting, that we do a rubber roof or a metal roof?
I'm suggesting that you get a bid on some other materials other than slate and let us evaluate what the cost would be for both. It's a significant amount of money to add us into the budget, and I'm not degrading anything that the library does. It's a great institution that we need here in Bennington, but it can operate in the same function whether it has a slate roof or a shingled roof. And I think as a select board, it would be important for us to know what the options are before we put that out to the voters. If there's a way for us to do it significantly cheaper, and it may not be, I'm not a roofer or an engineer or anybody that makes those decisions, but I want to know what the numbers are and some other options. And it may very well be that slate would be the best option to go with, but I can't evaluate that based just upon what I have here.
Well, I think in terms of aesthetics too, and just in terms of the ability of the roof to maintain. I mean, the roof we're looking at now in one section is 150 years old. I don't think that you're going to have that sort of life if you go with an asphalt roof or a metal roof or some other function. I mean, that should be a consideration as well.
Right, that very well may be true, but I'd like to see that.
Lynn, how many other grants are there that you could apply for in addition to the USDA grant to lower the
Well,
threshold here?
I could apply for, there's one grant that we did apply for that we were turned down for was the Gladys Brooks Foundation, and that's out of New York City, and they actually have funded projects in the state of Vermont up to $100,000. Certainly any grants that we, were able to secure, and we would continue to work vigorously towards that, would reduce the amount that we would actually need to hit the taxpayers with. And I think in terms of the cycle, if we can get in by the beginning of next year, which would not this January 2015, but if the voters approved it, then it would be January of 2016. That would put us in the right cycle for the following year.
Exactly how critical is this? By what time does this roof need to be either repaired, replaced, or you're really going to incur damage inside the building?
Well, we're incurring damage now. We're having problems with water seepage inside. And we had some work done on the fascia on Main Street, and the damage was much more extensive than we had realized, of course. And that roof is 150 years old. We have our 150th anniversary next year. And the gentleman that worked on it said that, of course, they didn't use plywood for underlayment when they were building roofs 150 years ago. So you're looking at slats, and at this point, they don't even really support the people that are getting on the roof to work on it. So when we try to do repairs, we actually are ending up doing more damage. And it's pretty critical at this point. I mean, it's been put off for a long time, certainly for, a couple of decades at this point. So we really need to get moving on it. And that's why we're coming to the town, because we just really, over the last 3 years, have not been successful in raising the funding we need for this project.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No, just that I think at budget time, we can also look at the line item that goes in for the library as it is, and maybe, I know you need it now, but maybe if it's drawn out over a few years, the burden might be a little less significant. What I'd like to try to do is find areas within our budget to account for this. So we're not seeing just an increase of $300,000, but Stu, unfortunately, that might be a burden that rests on your shoulders to try and reduce costs elsewhere, just so we can keep it level, if possible, to account for this.
Yeah,
Well,
Well, I think what the library is asking for is for you to place a ballot item out there that would allow the town to borrow the funds and pay them out over time, which is what happened several years ago when they did their entryway. The voters approved a borrowing, and my question to Lynn would be, why can't the library borrow?
well, we'd have to pay it back, is the
Well, I would
problem.
expect that
So
that
do
would be
we.
the case.
I know, but, you know,
It's a good question. and a
it
good
is a
answer.
legitimate question, but at this point, we're really pretty much we come to you every year and we ask for increased funding from the town. The library raises itself about 25% of our budget. We would have to work that into our budget and probably turn around and ask you for the increase. So, I mean, it's just not something that we can raise privately.
I think that's what John is suggesting, that when we deal with a budget and a line item, if part of the budget for the library is to repay a loan for a roof, then it comes out over a period of time rather than all at once to the taxpayer. And basically, these types of items should be line items for reserve against this type of thing. I can see back in
86.
1986, you know. So this is not something that's occurred overnight, and there's been a deferred maintenance, and now it's caught up. And unfortunately, we have to deal with it and help the library out. But I think that is one way that might be done.
Do you have an endowment that you can borrow against?
Well, the endowment produces some of our income that we have yearly, and if we borrow against that, of course, that income we wouldn't be able to use in the funds that are raised yearly. We really don't want to use the endowment. I mean, we could use that to secure a loan, but that could affect our income as well.
What's the total in the endowment right now, do you know?
It's around $500,000, and that creates for us about anywhere between, depending on what the market is doing, $20,000 to $30,000 in income, which we use every year. And some of those funds, actually, I should say about half of that is with the Vermont Community Foundation, and so we don't really have ready access to that funding. And that was all created before I came on as director, so I don't really quite understand it, but those are restricted.
Yeah, but you should be able to use it as collateral and still collect your income from it. As long as you don't default on the loan, you wouldn't lose any of your principal.
Currently, of course, we're paying back a loan for our underground storage tanks, and that's not a huge amount, but that's added to our budget as well. We really are looking, if we've explored this and we just don't feel that that's something that the library can assume in terms of a cost. And that's why we're looking to see if the voters will support that as a separate item on the town ballot.
I'd like to see something, if we do go forward with this, where we get a little more involved in the capital planning, I think. The fact that we have this documentation, it's this old about the roof, and there's no reserve, and we didn't start saving for it, is a little disappointing. And we certainly, at the town level, we do that. We have buildings and grounds people, we have accounting people, so that, that is available, if we should do that. So number one, I think we need to look at that. If there's any, if their second floor is starting to fail, we need to save up to fix that too. You can't just, expect everybody to jump in and when it crashes.
I agree. I will say, Greg, that we've just completed and the board has approved our capital plan, and that has a contingency built into it, so that, yearly we're hoping to put some money aside for capital improvements to the building. I think we've done quite well, over the last 11 or 12 years, just in terms of monies that have come into us. We haven't elected to give people big raises. Instead, we've put that money back into the building, and we've spent, over $500,000 on just working on improvements to the library.
I think most of our concerns that I hear is, the money obviously want to go to being a library. And now, to make large capital improvements on the building, we want to see, what we have to do to make that happen efficiently without taking money away from the library or other services in town. Obviously, we're not going to act on this tonight. We already discussed that, but we have some of these suggestions. If you could look into what the construction options are, we can give some thought to what funding options are and what we can do as far as getting something done without slamming the taxpayers. And,
Okay.
Could we, following John's suggestion, follow up with the cost benefit of a line item?
Yeah.
And maybe Stewart's office could give us some help.
Okay. Got that, Stu?
Sure.
How much is it going to cost, basically?
Let me throw-
Yeah, what it would cost to do that, and then, you know, obviously any material options, we'd want to know what the expected life was versus what's been presented.
Okay.
I think the
can,
slate typically is 100 to 200, 100
Yeah.
years, and you can flip them over. The asphalt's 25 or 50, depending on what you get, and then the
Right.
tin can be 75 to 100. So we can look at those different options.
Stuart, do we have somebody, would it be appropriate if we have somebody on staff to maybe help us evaluate what our options would be for that building, so we know? that-
Well, if we look at a borrowing, you're basically looking at a principal payment of over a 20-year period of $15,000 a year. And it really comes down to what is the interest. And depending on where the banks are at the current time, interest rates are incredibly low right now. I just, from my own personal perspective, I would not want to see the town's budget reduced to accommodate a facility that we don't own, that we don't control. And I think that would be my issue. I think if the library has an opportunity to borrow, they need to explore that and report back to us as to whether or not that's a budget buster for them, so that you can take that into consideration when you're thinking about putting this out before the voters. And I mean, it's the same issue we had whatever many years ago it was when we put the other issue before the voters. The voters did support it. And they made the library ADA accessible. They redid the front of the library on Silver Street. I can't remember what the other issues were that they were addressed. But I think there's more information we need from the library, including are there less expensive materials that would be, I mean, you can buy 50, 70-year shingles now. That would be my point from a management perspective. I would hate to see us trying to determine what municipal services we're going to reduce in order to support this facility, which we do not own or control.
My question was actually more of who on staff could we look to for some information about the actual materials used? You know, who, if it was one of our buildings, who would we turn to?
Oh, Larry McLeod.
Can we get some information from Larry
Sure.
on that?
Sure.
Well, we should, I mean, we have two
Well-
companies here. We should be able to use both of those companies.
Right, no, absolutely, but I would just like, if we were gonna replace the building on, the roof on this, we would, he would do an evaluation, we would talk to a couple different companies, and, he would give us some information, maybe he could get involved and just, give us his opinion on what could be viable.
Sure
So,
thing.
we have something, internally that we're turning to also.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, we can have something for you at the next meeting as to what cost differentials might be. Perhaps Lynn can check with
I'd be
whatever
perfectly
bank,
willing to do that.
that they're using to see what the cost for the bank, for the library to borrow the money, and then how do they fund that? Remember, if the library is receiving funding from a host of communities that support the library and use the library, that's one way to pay it off. This way, it's the taxpayers of the town of Bennington that are
Right.
being asked to pay it off.
Could we get a copy of your capital plan too, just so we could
Yes.
see what's coming up in the future? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I guess what you're looking for from me then is to have this rebid with using different materials and to present those bids to you folks to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, and to hopefully have that for you for the next meeting.
Perfect.
And
Okay?
it looks like you had boiled this down to the most competitive quotes as well. I'm sure they are. But if we could look at the options that you turned down, just so we know that they're out there and the reasons for.
Well, quite honestly, there are not a lot of companies that want to take it on, a project of this size on, and we're still waiting for another quote from another local organization. We've had bids from outside which are significantly higher than the local bids. So, the two that we are working with were both lower
just get
bids, and they were
anybody to
also
do a straight
local
roof, so.
organizations, local businesses. So, whenever possible, of course, we try to work with local businesses and just roll the money back into the town. Certainly, you will see, and I've noted it before, that a very high percentage, if not more than 100% of the funding we receive from the town is actually funneled back into the town in terms of support or services from local businesses and also salaries and so on and so forth. So thank you for your time, and I'll get back to you. And Stuart, would Stuart be the point person to discuss to
Yeah.
make sure that I've
Yes.
got the right information for you folks?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Lynn.
you, Lynn.
Appreciate the work you do.
Greg, can I comment on that? I think Stuart is, idea is right on the money. I think the other side of this will win is if you put this out to a vote, and the people turn it down, you're going to get a hell of a chance. I think Stuart's idea is if you could borrow it, and then slowly repay it. Stuart, was it only 15,000?
That's
maybe?
principal.
Normally, that's how the bond bank works. It takes the principal borrowing, divides it by 20, and that's what your principal payment is. And the rest all depends on what the interest rate is.
And the interest is low now, right?
Well, currently, our interest rates that we've been able to secure are incredibly low. It doesn't necessarily mean that the library would be able to secure the same competitive rates.
Could she borrow it through the town as long as it, can you do something like that? That you low interest?
No, that would require a vote of the people.
Because my fear is that you're not going to get 300,000, but it depends on how it's worded. A lot of people are hurt in this community, and I hate to see them get turned down, then what would you do?
Sure, go ahead.
A lot of people are hurting in the community, Michael, and you know, and it's supported by our numbers, which are up, okay? Library for many people in the community is the only place where they have access to books and resources and educational materials and computers, which is very important in this day and age. I mean, a lot of times the only way you can access government programs or apply for a job is via computer, and the library supports that and provides the technology that people in this community need. Our figures go up every year, and now with the Wi-Fi, it's really just going through the roof. I mean, we have thousands of sessions every month for people that are coming in and using the library with their, you know, using our free Wi-Fi. So in general, I think the community has been supportive. In 1986, I don't think that Bennington was necessarily any more affluent than it is now, but people recognize that the library is a very critical part of the economic infrastructure of this community, and they've been supportive. My point is that, you know, we're kind of at capacity for raising money, and if we borrow money, we're going to turn around and come to the town anyway and ask us, you know, to fund that at an increased request in our budget every year, because we just...
My concern wasn't, I don't want to take, my concern wasn't the library was important, it's just what if you get turned down by the voters, you're going to be in a
then we're turned down.
Yeah.
And they,
I think we can look at some options and try and come up with what makes the most sense. And, yeah. Yes, sure. Well, actually, I wanted to give this to Linda to put into the minutes, if that's all right.
I'd like that one back at some point, though, Stu.
I think I have...
You have a copy of this?
I have that.
Okay.
thank you.
I haven't thrown it away
No,
yet.
it wasn't that I was beating up the library, I just,
No, I understand. That's,
I hate to see it get turned down.
well, it's our responsibility to come up with something that makes sense, too, and we can present. All right, thank you, Lynn. Okay, the next item is the Bennington Housing Report presentation. Dan Monks is going to lead us off.
To get things started, Bill's actually going to do a presentation of the report since he was the main author of it. But just a quick recap for folks. I think it was last year we obtained a municipal planning grant to do this Bennington Housing Report. And it was really kind of usually a housing report is a definition or a determination of need in the community, and we really wanted to do two things. Define that need, but also to define our aspirations for what we want housing to look like in our community. So there's lots of background about current statistics, there's lots of information about current issues and needs, but there's also a forward-looking aspirational aspect to the report with regard to what we want our housing stock to look like in the future. So we're not asking for your approval this evening. We would certainly hope that you folks look closely at it over the next few weeks and give us any comments or concerns you have regarding the report. And then we're hoping that in the future that you would consider including it as part of the town plan, which is coming up and we'll be reviewing over the next, well, it's probably going to be next year. But that's kind of where we are, and I'll let Bill take over and go through the report, and certainly would welcome any questions, concerns you have this evening and any in the future as well as you digest it a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Good evening. Thank you for letting me be here to go through the housing report with you. As you know, this report was out in draft form in the summer, which you received at that point. Actually, for a draft document, it got an incredible amount of play. Keith did an article on it. Vermont Public Radio picked up on the fact that Bennington was doing a housing report. It was referenced during some recent community discussions multiple times, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to kind of walk you through the highlights with your permission and talk about next steps and recommendations. As Dan noted, the Bennington Housing Study was a priority strategy in the Bennington Strategic Economic Development Plan. As one of our top 10 priorities for the community, we identified the need to do a report to come up with the quality housing consistent with the needs of the workforce of Bennington businesses. The assumption underlying this was that there was a lack of quality housing at all levels, was impacting the ability of area businesses to recruit and retain employees. So that was the assumption that we approached this study with. It was the rationale that kind of drove the impetus for the study. And as Dan noted, in addition to analyzing the existing conditions on the ground, this report was intended to be forward-looking and create recommendations which would lead to a Bennington housing market that was something to which we could aspire in the future. So the process that we utilized was a review of housing plans and best practices in community housing from similar communities, primarily in New England. Those are all referenced in the back of the report that you have. We looked for former mill towns. We looked for communities that were economic and demographically similar to Bennington. And we looked for plans where creative solutions to housing dilemmas were approached. BCRC and the steering committee collected and analyzed economic, demographic, and housing data, reviewed existing local and regional planning documents as they pertain to housing policy. We hosted focus groups, real estate professionals, finance professionals, HR professionals, and a focus group of landlords and developers, and we conducted an employee survey. So some of the interesting data, just run through quickly with you. Population in Bennington has remained remarkably stable, basically since 1980, a slight increase in 1990, slight decrease in 2000, and a slight increase again in 2010. But roughly, population in Bennington has been the same for the past 35 years. Projections looking forward suggest slight losses in income. These are projection models done by the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. They look at birth rates, mortality rates, and in and out migration, and they extrapolate those forward, assuming similar demographics. The age distribution in Bennington, 53% female, 47% male. An average age at 40.8 years, which is slightly below the average age for the state of Vermont. This is primarily due to the college students who live in the community and through the census call Bennington their home. That drives down our average population age a bit. Education in Bennington, as you notice, we have higher numbers at the lower end of the scale, no high school degree or high school degree. Bennington tends to lag behind Bennington County and the state when it comes to those with associates, bachelor's, or advanced degrees beyond bachelor's. Employment data, Bennington's average wage, and this has been pretty consistent. This is a consistent trend from the time that I was in Mike's chair authoring grants on behalf of the town 15 years ago. Bennington traditionally is slightly below Bennington County with regard to average wage, and Bennington County tends to lag Vermont in average wage. I think of concern here in this data set is the red arrows. You'll notice that from 2003 to 2013, the average number of people working in Bennington declined by about 5%. Now this matches Bennington County, but it is in the opposite direction of the state as a whole. And if you look down at the economic sectors, you'll note that only education and professional services have more people working in those fields in 2013 than in 2003 in Bennington. With regard to household size, you'll see that fully 2/3 of our population is in 1- and 2-person households. With regard to income in these households, those are closer to Bennington County and Vermont averages. The concern for the community goes as the household sizes increase, you'll see a greater discrepancy in income in those larger household sizes between Bennington County and Vermont. So that suggests that our larger household sizes are not faring as well economically as the county or the state. So this is an interesting data set. In general, renters in Bennington pay a higher cost relative to income than in Bennington County, in Vermont, and in the state. Owners pay a similar percent of their income for their housing, but for a significantly lower value. So if you look at the number of renters paying in excess of 30% of their income in housing, you'll see Bennington is at 60.7%, is significantly higher than Bennington County or Vermont. And again, those paying more than 50% of their income, 27.3% is significantly higher than the county or the state as well. If you look down at the cost of home ownership, average housing cost with mortgage, in parens, you'll see that Bennington residents who own their homes pay about 22.6% of their income for that average mortgage, which is on par with what those in the state and in Bennington County pay. The unfortunate scenario there is that we're getting much less value with an average value of owner-occupied housing units at $161,000 for that 23% of your income versus $206,000 or $215,000 for roughly the same percentage of income elsewhere in the state. Also of some concern, if you look down at the very bottom number, this is a tracking of actual sales, 158 sales in Bennington from January 2013 through April of this year. You'll note that unlike Bennington County and Vermont, the average costs fell below what the census showed for Bennington. It went from $161,000 to $150,000 and change, whereas the average sales price rose in both Bennington County and in Vermont. The census, in addition to looking at townwide data, the census breaks up information into census tracts. There are 4 in Bennington. It actually further breaks it down into census blocks, but that becomes kind of really micro. But these are the 4 census tracts in Bennington. You'll see most of the western part of Bennington, basically west of Route 7. There's a northeast quadrant, a southeast quadrant, and an urban core. So the numbers that are here now reflect the number of households in those quadrants, the median household size in those quadrants, and the median household income in those quadrants. So this is interesting as we look into the section here on the urban core. You'll see greater density of housing, although those households tend to be smaller in size, which suggests a renter population, 1- and 2-person households. And you'll notice that the median income kind of in the urban area is significantly less than other areas of town. With regard to housing stock, Bennington tracked very closely with the county and with the state with regard to the percentage of people that own their homes, 55 versus 53 and 56. Bennington, as an urban center, has a higher percentage of renter-occupied units than the county or the state, but that is in addition to the urban area. That's largely explained by the fact that there are very few second or vacation homes in Bennington, only 6% versus about 20% in the county and the state. Also of interest here, looking at the number of units, which suggests the age of the housing stock. We heard a lot about the quality of the housing stock in Bennington as we're doing this report. If you look at the percentage of units built before 1940, you can see it's significantly higher than the county or the state. And if you look at the median year built, 1956 was the median year of Bennington housing construction, significantly older than county and state as well. So that's kind of the data that led us to some of the recommendations. As I mentioned, we held 4 focus groups. The almost transcripts of those focus groups are in the report. We tried to capture kind of flow of data as people were commenting. Again, those were financial services, real estate, human resource professionals, and landlords and developers. And in general, the response themes tended to fall into these categories. Lots of comments about the quality of Bennington housing relative to the price. Lots of comments about the difficulty in financing, particular purchasing for first-time home buyers. The older housing stock was referenced repeatedly. The fact that, unlike other areas, there was little new construction in Bennington. There was some concern expressed about the availability of jobs to support home buying. Several comments about the lack of quality rentals in the community. An overall representation that the community needs to do a better job promoting itself. There were references to the education system and the implications the education system, perception of the education system has on people's desire to live in town. Transportation was referenced as a component of housing, specifically in relation to employment and how transportation often impacts employment status for people, particularly at the lower wage spectrum, and then just general concerns about overall economic vibrancy. And the final component of the process was an employer survey, which consisted of some very basic questions. First of which, has the status of the Bennington housing market impacted your ability to recruit employees? Again, remember, this was kind of the underlying assumption with which we approached the report, was that this was a concern for Bennington employers. The responses suggested otherwise. So 12% said, yes, the housing market impacts our ability to recruit or retain employees. 88% said, no, not really. Now, on the surface, that might sound like, okay, that's not bad news. The follow-on comments, which we often heard in that 88% was because our employees will simply live elsewhere. They'll drive in from New York State, they'll go to Williamstown because there's a perception that the schools are better, they'll live in Manchester, and the like. So, while it's definitely a mixed message. What were the most frequently cited complaints about the Bennington housing market? Heard from employees. 38% said that there was a lack of quality rentals. 38% said we're not really hearing concerns from our employees. And 24% noted a lack of quality mid-priced housing. And for the study there, we noted mid-range as $150,000 to $250,000.
So, I'm sorry, Bill, so you're talking about purchases in that?
That's for purchase, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. For employees who have expressed challenges in finding housing, are they having trouble locating rental housing, housing for purchase, or both? Again, the primary concern was rental. 38% said we're not hearing about problems, and 12% said our employees are suggesting difficulty in finding both rental housing or they'd like to purchase a home and are having difficulty there. We had an open-ended question about strategies recommended by our employers to strengthen the housing market in Bennington, and they generally fell into one of 3 categories. One was to kind of analyze the reasons and attempt to resolve issues surrounding the relatively high cost of housing in Bennington compared to wages. There were comments about reforming social programs that encourage those from out of state to relocate to Bennington. Certainly we've heard this one, and it's certainly common in public dialogue. And the third was developing programs and incentives to renovate the existing low-quality housing stock. And finally, we asked, with regard to if a project were to come to Bennington, which of these would you think would have the greatest significance? And rank them as either very important, somewhat important, or not at all important. So that's the greater availability of low and moderate income housing for sale, the greater availability of low and moderate income housing for rent, the greater availability of moderately priced housing for sale, better quality scattered site rental housing, or a large 25 to 50 unit rental apartment complex that had amenities. And basically what we did here is we took the ranking scale, we assigned values to very important, somewhat important, not at all important, to come up with a prioritized overall ranking, with the top priority being a greater availability of low and moderate income housing for rent. So that was the number one suggestion from employers. Second was better quality scattered site rental. Third was a large rental unit, so the top three, again, were all rental related. And then you move into moderately priced housing for sale, and finally, low and moderate income housing for sale. So I think what this suggests, and you'll see in the report, is kind of the kind of blowout section in the middle of page 1 in the executive summary, is the fact that we approached a housing report looking for strategies to improve housing in Bennington. But what we realized quickly, which really probably comes as no surprise, is you can't separate improving housing from improving education, perception, and performance in the community from economic vitality. I mean, this is really a three-legged stool, and all of these need to be approached kind of at the same time. Certainly, there are a lot of people working on the education and economic vitality realm. We're hoping that the report and some of these strategies that come out of that will throw the housing components into the mix as well. So following that, we came up with a vision that Bennington will have a housing market with quality, affordable housing choices, suitable for all income ranges, that new housing investment will focus upon the renovation of existing housing stock and new construction which adaptively reuses existing buildings or which is located in areas with existing infrastructure, and that home ownership will be encouraged as a means to strengthen and sustain Bennington's neighborhoods. The goal is very simple: improve the quality of housing in Bennington. I mean, that's what it boiled down to. And strategies, investment in time, investment in energy, investment in money, resources should focus on the renovation and improvement of existing residential properties, the adaptive reuse of other existing buildings for housing, and targeted infill housing development. So 5 recommendations. First was to reverse the trend of renter-occupied housing in and around the central business district. Possible ways for doing this were to create various incentive programs for buyers. There was discussion about the possible creation of a duplex program for first-time home buyers, where some of the duplexes in and around downtown might be converted back to single-family or duplex homeowners, where a first-time home buyer could live on one side and with assistance and guidance and education could have rental income from the other side to allow a first-time home buyer or couple to perhaps afford a little more house than they might be able to without that additional income. And the possibility of pursuing neighborhood development area designation. This is a new designation available through the state of Vermont, which provides certain incentives for developing housing in targeted areas of a community. It's similar in process to the downtown designation process, and the application process is similar. We suggested work with area employers to encourage employees to live in Bennington. This could be done through employer-assisted housing incentive programs, through hosting a series of discussions with area employers regarding the communications that are being held with employees and recruits, particularly concerned with the HR people about the discussions that were being had about where people would live if they were to come here. And again, that's where we heard that, well, maybe they'll just live elsewhere because in New York State, there's a perception the taxes are lower, or there's a perception that the education systems might be better elsewhere. So we'd like to kind of understand what those discussions are and hope to change those discussions at some level. And we need to ensure that an adequate supply of rental housing consistent with the workforce needs remains available. I mean, I think this is an important point. I think the data shows, the anecdotal information shows, the survey shows, currently and for the foreseeable future, the greatest need in Bennington with regard to housing is the continued availability of quality, low and moderate income rental housing. It's the largest need. It will remain the largest need. It's not a focus of this report, primarily because there are other entities and individuals who are addressing that work. Again, this was looking at overall housing stock and things that we can do to improve the overall housing market. Work with local financial institutions to support improved housing conditions. Every financial institution by law has Community Reinvestment Act funds that need to be reinvested back into the community. Through discussions with our local financial institutions, there may be opportunities to target some of those funds for creative assistance programs for local home buyers. Creative financing programs with town supports for certain areas of town. I know there are new programs the community is looking at to address underserved areas in the town where with improved infrastructure, perhaps housing can play a component in that. And easier access to capital for property owners to make improvements. Consistently, we hear about the challenges for property owners to improve their properties after they own them. Makes it difficult as well for properties when they come up for sale because home buyers often can afford the mortgage, but there's no money available there, and it's very difficult for them to then gain money to make necessary improvements. This is where the community, I think, comes in, and the town comes in at the highest level to establish a toolbox, if you will, administered by the municipality to encourage the improvement of housing stock for rental and home ownership. There's opportunities perhaps to strengthen and promote the townwide housing loan program. Possibility may be looking at municipal loan guarantee programs for pre-identified projects. The municipality may take an active role in improving and making available tax sale properties. And I know at your next meeting, you'll be evaluating the disposition of several tax sale properties that you took back. I think that's exactly the type of recommendation that we're looking at here. I know also in front of you, you'll be looking at possibly a vacant building ordinance. So a number of communities in their best practices had ordinances for minimum appearance standards in the community. Right now, I know the vacant building ordinance is focused primarily on commercial properties. Perhaps that's expanded if it makes sense. Opportunity to enhance code enforcement activities and fines, as well as a consolidated program to identify and promote opportunities for investors to come in and actually invest in the existing housing stock in the community. So really what we're looking at here is kind of a series of carrots and sticks to encourage additional investment in housing in Bennington. And then finally, there's an educational component. We heard often that landlords need additional support, training, and assistance with regard to what it means to be a landlord and how to conduct their business. We're suggesting tenant education and a potential referral network for tenants who go through kind of basic tenant education. What's it mean to be a good tenant? What's it mean to be a responsible tenant? And if you go through that training, perhaps a referral network could be established of tenants where landlords could then call and know that these tenants have a certain base level of understanding of what it means to be accountable. And overall financial literacy in the community. So there are a number of entities, PAVE, the Community College of Vermont, and others who are doing basic financial literacy training. We recommend that those continue to be supported. So with regard to next steps, again, as Dan noted, we're hoping that the board will review this, make recommendations or suggestions with regard to any of the recommendations or strategies in the report, and ultimately endorse it. The Planning Commission has approved the document and passed it on to the Select Board for action. Once approved, we'd hope that the recommendations in the report would be linked with the Bennington Strategic Economic Development Plan, the Bennington Town Plan, and woven into work with the Bennington Economic Development Partners. We hope that taking upon these basic recommendations, that there would be an effort to prioritize them and develop action plans with specific measures for success. And we're suggesting that a housing or home ownership committee might be a reasonable next step. I know town staff, the regional commission, and others have had some discussions about the possible formation of such a committee, and I think we'll be back to the board at some point in the near future to talk about board representation and what that might look like. So with that, I would happily entertain any questions.
I got one question. Central Business District covers downtown, Main Street, Union Street. Were you suggesting that more owner-occupied housing in that area?
Well,
Or in the outlined area?
in and around the downtown area, I think one goal would be to, raise that median income. We saw that kind of central, the urban core of Bennington, which isn't, it's beyond the Central Business District, it's the streets that are around it, Silver, Imperial Avenue where I live, those types of streets. Increasing home ownership there may lead to, additional raises in the increase in the median wages in those areas, create a little more viability for sustaining neighborhoods through home ownership. I mean, that's the key strategy which is woven throughout, and we think that a good place to start is in the urban core.
That just stuck out to me as very contradictory from everything that I've just seen and seen you advocate for with the Shire's housing project. That's going to be up in that Silver Street area that's going to create a significant amount of rental property. Can you speak to that, how those two are going to jive together?
Sure. So I think the opportunity exists, as you noted, for both infill development and for renovation of existing structures. I think the strategy here is intended to look at existing rental structures in the community in that area and look to renovate those and perhaps move those to home ownership. Again, I think the data in the study, anecdotal and actual, shows the continued need for low and moderate income housing. Good planning suggests that the bulk of your housing should be in and around municipal services, infrastructure, shopping in the downtown community. So I don't think those are at all
well, I guess I just find it odd that the report would call for or suggest more home ownership in these areas, and we just supported, well, I didn't support, but the board just supported creating a significant stock of rental income in the very area that you're now saying we should be avoiding.
And again, it doesn't say avoid. It says we need both, and it says that there are opportunities for both. So low and moderate income rental housing is our top priority, should remain our top priority, and needs to be addressed. The opportunity to further strengthen neighborhoods through home ownership is a valuable additional suggestion. They're not at odds with each other. They can be pursued and should be pursued simultaneously.
But you would think that strengthening a neighborhood would be through home ownership, not through rental?
I think it can be done through either method.
I think your report also mentions getting people to buy into duplex houses where they are the owner and they do have a renter as well. What's the importance of that?
I think the suggestion there is a number of other communities have utilized this to take kind of larger homes and think about some of the homes, Union Street, Pleasant Street, Elm Street, those homes which are larger homes. If over time some of those could be converted to duplexes and a first-time homebuyer could be attracted to them, then there's the rental income on the other side, again, with appropriate support and training that kind of offsets a mortgage there and allows a new family to come in, be a homeowner, provide additional housing, gain some income, and begin to grow equity much more quickly in a home that they own.
Just a nit, I noticed that your numbers for median household income in Bennington, in the town of Bennington, are around 42K. The numbers that I've seen are around 38K. It's not a lot of difference, but at that level of money, 4,000 is a difference.
Yeah, again, these are taken from the most currently available. Some of this information comes from the American Community Survey. Okay. Again, that's related to the census, but it's more like Nielsen ratings where people receive mailings, those mailings are returned, and that information is extrapolated. I think ACS versus census explains some of the differences.
Gotcha.
Bill, I got a question for you. Do we have any data on trends outside of Bennington regarding home ownership or first home ownership? I mean, it was really about 10 years ago that I noticed that the change away from homeowner, or, owner-occupied duplexes to, professional landlord model for duplexes. And I'm not, personally, I don't see a lot of young people buying houses. I don't know if it's a local economic thing or if it's just a cultural trend that people are waiting longer to buy their first home. Do you have anything towards that?
We don't have specific data. What we do know is that Bennington, being an urban center, is going to have a much greater percentage of those multi-unit homes. We have heard repeatedly, both from landlords and developers, as well as from financiers, that selling those properties is difficult in this environment, to sell them as an investment. So the thought here was that perhaps taking those units, shrinking them down from maybe 3 or 4 units to duplexes, and trying to create incentive programs to bring in owners there was a way to kind of strengthen neighborhood bonds.
Thank you. Tom, did you have something?
I've got a couple of questions for you, Bill. One relative to the town of Bennington's low interest housing loan program. And this is probably something that Dan and Mike can respond to, but I think there is sort of a lack of real understanding about that program, what it offers, what it could offer, and maybe that needs to be, among other areas, examined and get some attention focused on it, because I think that is a resource that is not being used. The other thing is, I think it's a very impressive report, and thanks for you and your partners' effort, because it's really puts out a clarion call to the community that we've got to address these issues that are long, I think, and overlooked. And I was surprised because I thought that the housing market was the reason we were having difficulty recruiting and retaining. But I hear you say that the employers basically say, we can employ whoever is willing to come to our job site. We'll find them housing. Somehow we have to incent not only the employee, but the employer to make it attractive enough for them to locate here and be retained here. I'm not sure if there's an answer in the report, or there's, if you've given any thought to that part of it.
Well, I think the idea is, again, with the employer assistance programs, I mean, at some level, you're calling upon area employers to be community-minded, to look for creative ways to support their employees in living locally. The study noted that their employers aren't necessarily having a problem recruiting or retaining employees, but I don't think Bennington wants to be the town where at 5 o'clock the lights are turned off because people are going back to live elsewhere. So there's a bit of community-mindedness there, I think, starting with some of our larger employers and having those types of communications about how can we support your employees, how can we change the discussions as employees are coming in or transitioning, going through life transitions, about, hey, have you thought about living in Bennington? If we can get additional information about if not, why not? I think those discussions need to take place, and I think as a community we need to be creative about finding ways to support our employers in supporting their employees to live in Bennington.
Because I think there is a perception, which may become, or may be reality, that these concerns about employment opportunities, the educational system, and again, a lot of it is perception, and maybe we need more public relations and dealing with some of those aspects, because perception is reality. And I think you mentioned that a lot of folks think that it's better to live in Arlington to go to Manchester, it's better to live in Pownell to go to the Massachusetts schools, when in fact that probably is not a real reason for going there.
Right. I mean, we certainly as a community need to address the perceptions. I think in that graphic where we looked at education and housing and economic vitality together, I think all three of those areas suffer from a certain lack of appropriate promotion and discussion in the community. So I think we certainly need to change that dialogue.
Thanks. Thank you.
Any citizens comments on this? Or
We're just the select board right now. John, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I wanted to note that was throughout, I think, maybe even both surveys, probably, in my opinion, one of the shining stars was the discussion around the finance education of our children in the school district. just looking at that, I mean, 70% of our community has some college education or less. And budgeting can be such a useful tool that can change someone from renting all their life to setting themselves up to have that, I think somewhere along the line, as it said, 3% to put down for that new home, to get that leg up and really understand how to tighten that belt. So if that's done, it can change, you know, the way that people actually live their lives, and they'll be buying smarter. I know it's something that I never even considered until, you know, recently myself, and the differences are huge. So I thought that was great that it was peppered in a number of different sections.
Thank you.
Another couple of comments. I know we're talking about quality housing and what type of housing. Some of the things that I've seen, just with the groups of people that I talk to and watching people come to town from different areas, different states, is they're coming either alone or with a significant other, and so what they're lacking is a single bedroom apartment. So we have a lot of apartments out there that are 2 and 3 bedrooms, but we don't necessarily have that stock of the high or decent quality single bedroom at a decent rate. So I know that it wasn't necessarily said in there, but I think it can be included. The other thing I missed, maybe it was in the report, but we talked about the employer surveys, and I was wondering if there's a list of who those employers were, just so I could get a better understanding of what the dichotomy of the set was.
So this was done through SurveyMonkey, and it was distributed through the Bennington Chamber of Commerce, the Better Bennington Corporation, and the BCIC list. They were anonymous, so they weren't.
Okay.
So that information came into SurveyMonkey. It was aggregated. We used the analytics to spit it out, but so they weren't signed.
So I guess the reason I'm asking is because there could be a huge difference between a local employer that typically hires people that are already living here compared to an employer that's hiring from outside.
Right.
So no, they're not looking for additional housing and not having trouble finding housing because they already lived here, whereas it could be completely different. Just understanding that set, I understand the positives of having an anonymous survey. Right. It would just be a nice data set to have.
We tried to address that through the HR focus group, and I think the information that we heard at the HR focus group mirrored very closely what we saw in the employer survey with regard to where concerns were, again, primarily on that rental side as opposed to the home buying side. And that HR focus group is where some of these discussions about employer assistance and the dialogues which are happening between employers and employees kind of came out, and I think where those kind of recommendations came from. So we tried to support the survey through kind of discussions with employers. Even beyond the actual focus group, we reached out to some of the larger employers, the school system, the medical system, some of the larger manufacturers to make sure that they had an opportunity to provide some input.
And then the last thing I noted was looking at the decreasing population. You know, it said we peaked in the 90s. I think we lost 1,000 people within the next 15, 20 years, and now we've been pretty much stagnant, but our projections are still showing a decrease in our population out another 15 years on top of that. In relation to, there's 2 different discussions. There was renovations, and then there was new projects as well. Obviously, we want to have a little bit of both, so we have some new buildings for people to move into, but with the continuous decrease in our population, how do we answer, again, in one of the groups, I think it was a group of realtors, they noted that the market was actually flooded and that we had too many properties on the market right now, and so it's not helping the property values at all. So when that's taken into consideration, where should our efforts lie in terms of increasing and improving new developments?
Yeah, I think also as part of the real estate group, and certainly throughout, what we heard was, and one of the challenges in moving those properties from being for sale to being sold is in the quality of those properties. So homeowners who may be burdened with mortgages, maybe one of the partners lost their job, they're kind of hanging on, the house is for sale, they don't have the available money to invest in making the property suitable for sale. We also heard from the realtors, and certainly we've had additional information in this regard, that home buyers, particularly younger buyers who are coming into this market from away, have a different expectation. Many other areas, there's much more, there's newer construction. They're used to kitchens with, you know, granite countertops and a little higher amenities than in what our typical 1956 era house may have, and that people may have had the money to invest in. So I think investment, again, needs to focus on ways to allow investors and homeowners to look at the existing housing stock and make improvements to that housing stock, making it more attractive to people who may be coming from the outside or who are looking to move up locally. We heard repeatedly, and I think sales statistics back this up, that at the lower end of the housing market, those homes move pretty quickly. It's when people try to go from that lower end home to that mid-priced house that they're having difficulty making that jump, and that's almost exclusively a quality issue.
So would you think that we should try and also focus in on I guess the mid-range housing? Is that what we're reading in here?
Yeah, the idea being focused in housing consistent with kind of Bennington income ranges. And if you look at those various household sizes, if you look at roughly 3 times what those are, that kind of targets you in about what that household might be able to afford for housing.
And this goes back to Dr. Mullins' first meeting, or final meeting here, we're talking about the age of the housing stock. And one of the big problems, of course, when you buy a house is you can't finance any money to fix it. You've spent all your money on a down payment, and you need to replace something in the kitchen or something, you stumble on it, and you can't finance that into the mortgage. So
Well, they were talking about programs within a few of these studies where they had
I thought that was great news, because I think that's an issue with a lot of the homes in Bennington. And
there are some programs, 403B programs, that have come on which have a small amount of money which you can borrow beyond, and I know a number of the financiers had noted some success in there. It allows them an additional $20,000 to $30,000. What we're finding is maybe that's not quite enough, so what we're hoping is that through employer participation, there may be additional opportunities there.
There's a lot of houses in Bennington with 1 bathroom, and it's very hard to renovate a bathroom once you're living there.
And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to sell a house with 1 bathroom.
Yeah,
that's just not the expectation for people coming from the outside.
And so you kind of get stuck once you're in. You don't get the renovations done. Anyone else? Mike, did you want to ask a question of Bill?
I would, again, like Bill, I think he's done a nice job there, but I would caution the select board not to just adopt this or all of it and put it in the town plan. I think it contradicts itself. I'd like to ask Bill, as he went through it, but he went through it fast and didn't have, what is your answer? You presented some problems maybe, but what is your answer to curing them? And not only that, what is the need for people who work here, have to live here, when they could live in Shasbury or Pownell? When you bring people to live here that work here, you're creating a whole bunch of new burdens on the town government and on the school system, yada, yada, yada. And I don't quite see the need of putting something like this in the town plan. We put in the town plan a few years ago about we wanted to be sufficient energy, renewable energy. And right now that's coming back to bite us in the butt because we just built a $7 million welcome center. And because of our town plan, the people up in that area can't fight the solar project that's going up there. It's going to clear cut 15 acres. And we can't do anything about it. Stu and I have talked, we don't even have party status in the town because of it. Is that correct?
Actually, I believe the town does have party status,
If they want
but you have to pursue it.
You have to pursue it.
Right.
So I mean, I'd be very cautious of just rubber stamping this and putting it into the town plan. But answer me one question, Bill. What is the reason that it would be better for them to live in Bennington and not in Shasbury Pownell if they worked at Lassonde or whatever?
Well, I think it's a fundamental discussion about what you want for your community. And I, for one, personally would want to live in a community that has economic vibrancy, where the schools are of quality, where people live and work and recreate in one area. I'm not particularly keen, and I think probably most in this room are not particularly keen on having a community that at 5 o'clock the lights turn dark and everybody goes to live and enjoy the rest of their lives elsewhere. I think the essence of the community is having people living in it and being a part of the community. It's what sustains our social programs, it's what sustains our educational system, it's what sustains our local economy. I think it's absolutely critical that people be living in the community where they work.
But I wonder, how is that the burden of the select board to fix that problem? If you say it's a problem, how is it the burden of the town government, of the citizens of the town, to be able to fix that? We can't just go out as a town. We just had a discussion where we got a library, $300,000 needs a roof. We can't just go out What are we going to put into the
I think that is the difficulty about trying to find the programs that would work. Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, this seems like step one in identifying what needs to be done, and then the next step would be clearly identifying the process and procedures to accomplish
And
the top priorities.
I think there are a number of concrete recommendations in the report which suggest a path forward, which don't necessarily involve significant investment of community resources in terms of dollars. It's about being creative. It's about working with local employers. It's about working with the educational system. It's about working with local financial institutions. To be creative, create public-private partnerships. If you look at the best practices and successes in other communities noted in the report, you will see consistent reference to public-private partnerships to move home ownership, improve the quality of housing, and those types of efforts forward. And I think that there's ample opportunity for us to do that here without burdening the Bennington taxpayer.
And I think that the current state of our housing stock is an indication of what happens when you don't have a plan or you don't have an effort working in a direction. I mean, if you just go around and look at, the house I bought and things, there's a lot of houses in town that have not been updated since 1956 or 1965 or something like that. And there's a lot of economic and cultural reasons for that. But I think if you do have the efforts.
Where is that the burden of the townspeople or the select board? Where is that the burden if you're everybody's problem? I really wish
Well,
we
there's.
not just adopt this for the town plan.
Well, that's a discussion we're going to have as to whether we adopt it or not. But I think the reason we have these plans is so that we don't find ourselves in these situations down the road. I mean, it's our job to provide the services for the people in the town. If the body of the population cannot support those services, then we have a problem.
The best way to cure it is higher wages for the people who do employ the people that are here or come here. You need higher wages to compete for loans and everything else. And Sharon might be able to talk about it. How does a low-interest loan, down payment, when you go in to get a loan at the bank, isn't some of the problem for the young people they don't have the down payment?
Oh, sure.
But there's different programs that they don't need to have the entire 20% down.
So you don't need to, they didn't? Okay.
It's changed a lot. And when I first bought a house, I had to have 20% down, and I had to show them where I got it. They want to make sure that somebody didn't just hand me that money. They want to make sure I had a pattern and stuff. It's changed a lot so that to try and incentivize home ownership at first time.
Well, I don't know.
Well, this one program, they were talking about 3.5%.
Yeah, but your credit has to be very good as well.
Yeah.
So that's the battle. Good credit, having the 3.5% down, it will work for you. But, if you made a mistake here and there, you might not be able to qualify. So there's a number of challenges.
Bill, I think this is a great report, and it's obviously going to spur lots of conversation before it comes to a final, whatever it comes to. But I think you did a great job.
Great, thanks. Despite Mike's protestations, I don't think there's any radical recommendations in the report, and I would hope that the board would consider them, certainly make comments to Dan or to me with regard to concerns you have about any of the recommendations. I mean, that's really the opportunity for the board to have input. The data is what the data is, and the recommendations were drawn, from that data and from the other processes that we employed. But certainly, if there are comments regarding recommendations, we would happily take those.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is the general public having access to the report?
Dan, is it it's available online?
It'll be on the town website? Okay.
It's pretty much a prescription for a vibrant community.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. Next item is the manager's report. Stuart?
Yes, I've got two action items. The first is the fire facility use permits. Just talking with the finance director today, over the last fiscal year, we generated only about $900 in fees from the use of this facility. And frankly, that really doesn't come close to paying for the time and the effort it takes to, in a sense, ready the facility for use by some of the nonprofits and then clean up after them after it's been used. So the suggestion here from the chief who is overseeing the rental of this facility is to have two applications, one for fire department members, which is a fee, free of fees, The second would be to increase the fees for nonprofits who wish to use the facility based on what they want the facility for. And we have a number of nonprofits that want to use the kitchen facilities, they want to use the tables and chairs, they want to have some sort of a major event here. We try to accommodate them, but we're not generating sufficient revenue to really offset our costs for that kind of use. So you see a fee increase here. Hopefully will bring us more in a par with what we might anticipate the use to be. And two, the application forms are a lot better than the one we're currently using. So I'm asking the board if they would like to adopt the new fee schedule and put these new applications into use. If you don't wish to take an action tonight, but wish to think about it, that's fine with me. We would bring it back to you on the 8th of December.
Stu, can you just contrast the existing fee schedule?
I knew you were going to ask that. I can't, off the top of my head. And I didn't think to grab it before I left for the meeting, so I'm at a loss, and I can have that for you, and perhaps that's a reason to put this on.
Yeah, I'd just like to be able to feature that.
I've got a couple questions on not on the volunteer, not on the fire department member side, because I think that's certainly appropriate, for them to have access to this building without any fees. But on the nonprofit/volunteer group side, what are we coming up with a difference here between nonprofits and volunteer groups? You know how those two things are being defined, and why there's a difference in the fee structure?
I don't know that there is a difference in the fee structure.
Well, it says $50 an hour for nonprofits as follows.
There you have it, yes.
And then for volunteer groups, $25 an hour.
Well, volunteer groups tend to be things like the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, Brownies, Girl Scouts, where they're not a 501c3 or a 501c6 organization that would be considered a nonprofit under law. They generally tend to operate with nothing but volunteer leadership and raise their funds through the sale of cookies or bake sales and things like that. They're not in the business of making money. They don't generally secure grant monies to operate so that
They don't have staff, et cetera.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And I think the Boy Scouts is the primary example, whereas a nonprofit would be one of the agencies, could be one of the agencies we fund through our tax dollars, could be a host of others that don't even use us that happen to have the nonprofit status. They tend to have funds available to them to rent spaces. And one of the things that we are reluctant to get into is attempting to allow this space to now compete with other large spaces that are available for renting, such as the Moose, the Elks. And they're charging much higher fees than this. I think it's $350 a night for the Elks public space. But we want to discourage this becoming a major competition for those organizations, because those organizations rely on the rent. We're looking only to make enough money to help maintain it.
You had said that there was $900 collected last year?
Yes.
1,000, so I mean, if it was 1,000, under this fee structure, it'd be around 20 hours of use for the $50?
Yes, but the fees are less, and that.
Oh, that's right.
Yes. Let me get that information for you.
Say that again, I'm sorry, the fees are
The fees are less currently.
Fees are less
So-
now.
So, so let me do that. And there are some, there are some folks who, we want to get this out early enough, but I don't have the information. I apologize for that. I should have grabbed it on my way out and did not. So this will be back before you on the 8th.
Okay. For the record, the fee for nonprofits is $50 per hour for use of the room and $150 for use of the kitchen. The volunteer groups is $25 per hour for use of the room, $150 for use of the kitchen. And there's a $50 deposit for the building key, which would be returned when the key is returned to the police department. So we're going to look for the contrast on the old price structure. But okay. Any other questions for Stu on that?
I guess I would just like to comment that, you know, it being a public space, it seems like the actual cost of, you know, maintaining the building goes down with the more, you know, people that actually get use out of it. You know, it adds value to it. That would just be my opinion. So I would think, that, you know, the more we would be able to allow people to use the facility that we're already paying for, the better. But I want to see the other numbers, I guess.
Okay.
The second action item, we'll call it, is a request that I'm putting before you to officially close the town offices the day after Christmas. Christmas falls on a Thursday this year. Some of my employees have indicated a willingness to use their own time to take the time off, and obviously we would not object to that. And so my question to the board is, should we just simply close the office rather than try to operate it with a skeleton crew? Not expecting many customers, frankly, the day after Christmas. And normally we would be open that day, unlike Thanksgiving holiday where we are officially closed on the day after Thanksgiving and have been traditionally for years. But Christmas floats. It's the 25th, regardless of when it falls. And in this particular case, it does fall on a Thursday. Many of my people are planning to take the time off anyway. So I'd just soon close and let people use their own personal time to pay them, you know, to seek pay for that closure.
We're closed.
Just for this year, I think.
It would be
Yeah,
just this year.
Or the
because
Friday.
next year, the day of Christmas will
Saturday.
move.
I think it makes sense rather than opening the building and firing up the heat and the lights and everything for the number of people that probably come in on the 26th. We're closed on the 26th, and people travel. Yeah. You know, if people travel and, you know, just have them come back. Of course, don't tell my mother. I tell her I have to work today. But but I, you know, if people are traveling or something, I think a lot of businesses are closing that day, sometimes instead of Christmas Eve. But you know, that's my feeling.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Need a motion on that?
So the consensus would be sufficient.
Consensus should be sufficient.
Any objections?
It's a way of letting the public know that we're
All
going to
right,
be.
we do not have any objections. The town offices will be closed on the 26th of December as well as the 25th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two notes, and I think I tried to get this information out, but the Benmont Avenue Bridge, the Hunt Street Bridge project, will not be going forward this fall. The contractor and the state of Vermont were unable to come to an agreement as to the end date of the project. If we accelerated the beginning of the project, the state was looking to have a benefit at the end of the projects, having that end date move up. The contractor was unwilling to do that at the last conversation I'd heard. So we are anticipating the project will begin next spring and run through the next construction season, possibly through the following winter, the winter 2015, 2016.
Is there a financial impact on that?
That's
No,
disappointing.
the contract, it was bid that way. So there's no change in the cost of the project to us or to the state. It's just that the contractor was hoping to start this year and accelerate the project itself. The last item I note here is and we'll have this on the agenda for the next time, the Joint Municipal Survey Committee. A 13-town consortium has been meeting with the Bennington County Regional Commission to talk about a solid waste alliance or a solid waste district. The majority of the folks that have been meeting have focused on the Solid Waste Alliance, which will be require an intermunicipal agreement between between and among the participating towns. The resolution that you see in your packet will be before you next week as an agenda item, not next week, but the 8th of December. If you choose not to participate, you would simply not accept and support the resolution. But I think it's, given the changes in the solid waste rules and regulations, there's truly an advantage, not only for the smaller towns who don't have management, professional management over them, but certainly even for us to share our resources, perhaps reduce the cost per capita, and benefit the entire county with a more cooperative approach to handling solid waste and recyclables.
Well, this is something we've been following a while, and we've been hoping that all the towns would agree. I think that the complication was going to be if half adopted it and half didn't.
Well, I think you're going to find that there may be some groups that opt not to participate. The big concern is obviously the loss of local control, and that's what most boards are afraid of, but there are a lot of communities that are recognizing that they can't continue to use their transfer stations and their recycling depots the way they have in the past, that it's getting more complicated, and so looking for some sort of cooperative agreement, I think, is an appropriate first step towards moving forward on solid waste.
Great.
Okay.
Anything else, Steve?
I do have one liquor license. Ramonto's is changing ownership, and there's only one page that requires your signatures here. As far as I know, it's going to operate in a similar fashion. This just came to me today, so we weren't able to get it on the agenda, but this is a new license, so it must be circulated at the state level as well.
Okay. Tom, you have any other business?
No, I don't.
Michael?
None.
Sherry?
No, just to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Justin?
No.
John, you have anything?
Is the name going to change?
Pardon me?
Ramonta's, the name going to change?
I'm not entirely certain.
You have any other
No, I
business?
don't have any
for
other
that?
business.
Okay. I just a couple things. Again, happy Thanksgiving. Travel safely. They're predicting some nasty weather Wednesday night into Thursday morning, so if you need to adjust your travel plans, keep an eye on that. Saturday is Small Business Saturday, a lot of people out. Dan, oh, go ahead, Dan.
Just some good news. I wanted to announce earlier, but I forgot, and Bill reminded me on his way out. If you recall, just a few months ago, we applied for a municipal planning grant of $20,000 to help leverage $42,000 that were offered to us by the Agency of Natural Resources through the EPA to do a downtown master plan, and in particular, a feasibility study for several properties in the downtown to facilitate economic development of those properties. We just got word today that we were awarded those grants, and I think the big thing to note about this is there's absolutely no local match. So this is all money that comes to us through the states and the federal government to do what I think is an important project that you all will be appraised of as we continue to move forward. But some good news.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
The Bennington Cultural Planning Committee, which came out of the Cultural Summits, is meeting again on December 4th. That meeting includes a view at, Amy Anselmo has started what's called livinlocal.org. It has a community calendar on it as a way to upload your community event, cultural event, music, whatever, art exhibit, and put that on there. So we're working towards that singular community calendar of events that people keep asking us to do, and Amy stepped up and is producing that. So we're going to work on making a little video on how to do that. We'll get that out, try and publicize that. Look at livinlocal.org if you want to see how that works. And then the other day I went through North Bennington. I noticed they'd wrapped up the fountain, and I realized I never really congratulated North Bennington, the folks who did that. You've got the new fountain downtown, which is now put away from the winter. Was beautiful. They had it up and running before the end of the season. They've also got the Mosley Bridge down on the Park McCullough grounds, which was an old bridge that had been sitting in disrepair for years. It was a very significant piece of metal fabrication. LNG fabricators got it back together, and they've got it out there. There'll be an interpretive sign on it pretty soon, and encourage you to go check it out. But thank the folks that were involved for that. It was a big volunteer effort to get those two things up and running. That is it for the meeting. We have an executive session to discuss contracts and to discuss a litigation issue. So I will entertain a motion.
Move we go into executive session.
A motion?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor? That is everyone. We are in executive session. Thank you, everybody.